So nobody really does cruise ships like Royal Caribbean, right? We have Quantum of the Seas, Icon of the Seas, Allure of the Seas, Utopia of the Seas, all of the seas. Wait. I mean, these are massive, massive ships, right? And they really seem to be well suited for either the Mediterranean or the Caribbean, where the climates are warm, where you can get outside and hit all the water slides and the surf riders, flow riders and the rock walls, and just get out and enjoy the resort experience. But what if you wanted to do a resort experience in Alaska? Well, Royal Caribbean's got you covered. So let's take a look and see what Quantum of the Seas is doing in Alaska. Hey, welcome to This is the Cruise. I'm Clint, and this is the channel where we look at upcoming cruise itineraries and try to figure out if this is the cruise for you. This is part 2 of my 5-part Royal Caribbean Alaskan itinerary series for 2024. In part 1, we looked at Brilliance of the Seas. In part 3, we're going to do Radiance of the Seas. In part 4, we'll do Ovation of the Seas. And then in part 5, we'll wrap it up with kind of a best of the best. So again, this is part 2. We're looking at Quantum of the Seas for Royal Caribbean's 2024 Alaskan sailings. I went through every single Royal Caribbean itinerary that they're offering in 2024 and weeded out all of the land tours into cruises and looked at everything, every destination, every port, every itinerary, found every variation that they're doing, ran it through my Clint's Cruisability Score calculation, and came up with the strongest and weakest itineraries. Before we dig into those, though, if you enjoy the content, if you find it helpful, I really would appreciate the like, the subscribe, the notification bell will tell you when I release the next Royal Caribbean itinerary videos that are coming up. It really helps out the channel. And if any of these videos have helped you find just the right cruise for you, where you can say, this is the cruise for me, I really appreciate it if you buy me a cup of coffee. You can find a link for a donation in the description below. It's safe and secure, helps me out, helps me keep the content coming for you, and I really appreciate it. So Quantum of the Seas, massive ship, right? Mega ship. It's going to Alaska in 2024. And with the exception of one sailing, Quantum of the Seas is doing 7-day cruises out of Seattle. The exception is a one-way cruise from Seattle to Vancouver, and we'll talk more about that cruise coming up, so stay tuned. Unlike Brilliance of the Seas, which was my previous video, Quantum does not cruise the Inside Passage on the way up to Alaska, which is unfortunate, but the ship, is big enough. There's enough going on. You'll be distracted the whole time, so I wouldn't be too concerned about that. That said, though, there's definitely a booking to avoid if you've never been to Alaska and want a glacier experience. So hang with me, we're gonna get to that coming right up. So your destination ports will be some combination of the following. One cruise does go to Icy Strait Point. Then you'll have a combination of Sitka, Skagway, and Juneau, and then Victoria. And if this were a Canada cruise, where Canada was the destination, I'd be thrilled about stopping in Victoria. This is a Jones Act requirement stop. We have to stop somewhere in Canada because we're leaving from Seattle, and it's just the way the laws are written that we have a foreign port stop when leaving from the United States. There are some great explanation videos out there. I'm not going to get into it here, but we will be stopping at Victoria. The thing to know about stopping here, really stopping at any of the Canadian ports, is that because cruising from Alaska requires some flexibility in your timing, your stop in Victoria may be shorter or even longer than expected. So just be aware of that. Our stop was just a few hours, and it really wasn't enough time to kind of get out and explore the area. But we were also cruising Alaska to cruise Alaska, not Canada. So it really didn't feel like that much of a missed opportunity, just that we would have liked to have done more in Alaska. And the only itineraries really to experience that are ones that leave from Vancouver. Most Alaskan cruises visit glaciers, and Quantum of the Seas is no different. Quantum goes to Endicott Arm and Dawes Glacier, And this ship doesn't visit any other glaciers. So if your itinerary is going to a glacier, those will be the glaciers you visit. All of these itineraries stop in Juneau and Victoria. Since these itineraries, though, are so similar, we're going to talk about the two outliers. And here's the one that I would avoid. Any of the September sailings. If your departure's in September, I wouldn't recommend it unless the price was just too good to pass up. And by too good to pass up, don't be fooled. You should be spending less than $100 a day. You can cruise Alaska very affordably. Even though these are mega ships and are resort ships, now the weather's getting colder. You're probably not going to want to be outside. And if I'm going to be on a ship where I can't be outside, full disclosure, the mega ships are great because they've got tons of inside space, but the parks are outside, the flow riders are outside, the water slides are outside, the inside spaces fill up, and everybody's trying to stay a little bit warmer. So keep that in mind. The big reason I don't want to take any of these September sailings, aside from the weather, is that they don't visit any glaciers. They actually skip them altogether. And honestly, if you did go to a glacier, you might not see much just because the weather can be so unpredictable. It may be perfect, but the likelihood of it not being great is much higher than, say, cruising in June or July or August. You'll visit Sitka, Skagway, Juneau, and Victoria, and those can be nice stops. We talked about visiting Victoria, but it's going to be the weather's going to be unpredictable, and so I wouldn't go out of my way to book these itineraries as my big grand Alaskan cruise, or my big first Alaskan cruise. This one does get a Clint's Cruisability score of 19.04, and if you watch my Brilliance of the Seas video, you'll see that that's on the lower side of decent. And it's decent because the stops are pretty solid. But you have a risk reward when it comes to cost to consider. Okay, so what you're going to see with the next grouping of itineraries is that they're all pretty close together in score. And I don't think you can really go wrong with any of these, but this is going to be the lowest scoring of kind of the middle of the road group here. The itineraries that leave May 6th or August 26th, there's only 2 sailings, are the other kind of 2 weaker sailings of the group. And by weaker, I mean barely weaker. They're just on the edge there. You'll go to Icy Strait Point, Skagway, Juneau, and Victoria with a scenic cruise at Endicott Arm and Dawes Glacier. It is a fine itinerary. From a score perspective, it's just at the bottom of the middle of the pack with a Clint's Cruisability score of 19.36. All right, so then there are 10 sailings on May 13th, 20th, June 3rd, 10th, and 17th, July 1st, 8th, and 29th, as well as August 5th or August 12th that go to Skagway instead of Ketchikan. Skagway has a lot to offer, including the White Pass train, but it's going to be busy because you're on Quantum of the Seas with maybe 6,000 other people or so. So just be aware of that. And these dates get a Clint's Cruisability score of 19.6. Sailings on May 27th, June 24th, July 22nd, and August 19th go to Ketchikan instead of Skagway. So, if seeing an old school mining town is your jam, this is great, right? It gets a Clint's Cruisability score of 19.72. So where were we at? 19.36. 19.6 and then 19.72. Those are pretty tight together. You can see that especially these last 2 are basically tied, right? You can't go wrong with these, 14 sailings. But here's my hot take. None of those are my pick for This Is the Cruise. I think this is the cruise for me. If I could go on any of these itineraries, I would go on the single 7-night Alaska adventure itinerary leaving from Vancouver on April 29th. It's early in the season, but it is a one-way that arrives in Seattle. You don't leave Vancouver until 3:30 a.m. So think about this. You can actually, if you do it right, and I know Quantum of the Seas is a huge ship you're going to want to explore, but I think what I would do is get on the ship when my embarkation time calls for it, drop my stuff off, kind of get my stuff settled, and then get off the ship and go do something in Vancouver. It's not risky if you plan it right. Then get back on the ship, leave at 3:30 in the morning, and you have the whole day to explore. enjoy that time. You don't have to. One of the challenges with cruising is oftentimes your hotel checkout. Like, let's say you don't live in Vancouver or Seattle and you can't just get there the same day. You usually want to fly in at least a day ahead of time, so that way you're safe from a timing perspective if there's a flight or transportation problem, and then you have some time to explore that city, which I think is really, really fun to do. But then you check out of the hotel the next morning, and then what do you do with your luggage while you wait for your embarkation time, for your boarding time? Well, this kind of solves that problem, because now you can drop your stuff off and then you can go back in the city and actually do some Vancouver sightseeing. I kind of like that idea. This one visits Ketchikan, Sitka, Juneau, and cruises Endicott Arm. I don't know why there's a stop in Victoria. We left from Vancouver. Royal Caribbean, what are you thinking? You don't need to do that here. But they do. So, instead of getting another stop in Alaska, we stop in Victoria. This is an Alaskan cruise. It's just what it is. And then we end up in Seattle. This one gets a Clint's Cruisability score of 22.44. And the reason it scores so much higher is because of Vancouver. Vancouver has a lot going for it. It's a great city to visit. And imagine leaving from Seattle and instead of stopping in Victoria, you stopped in Vancouver. You're going to get all of that as well. So this gets Clint's pick. It is a bit of a hot take because it is a little early in the season, but I think if you're going to pick a shoulder season, cruising in, say, late April, early May, or in September, I think it's better to cruise in May than later in the season. What do you think? Leave me a comment. Let me know. Is my take on this right, or am I way off base? Again, you've got a solid 14 options right in the middle of the pack, and you've got one sailing that's one way that maybe is a little bit of a different experience. So I got to give a little bit of credit there. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting and informative. Let me know if you're going on Quantum of the Seas, what itinerary are you going on, and I'll see you next time.